Hello, and welcome to another creepy and true real life tale. Now, this tale is a bit different from our usual subject matter, but one that I thought would be an interesting addition to our story times. But trigger warning: if you are uncomfortable with the subject matter of abuse, violence, and unaliving someone, then please, by all means, do not continue to listen. If you do so choose to continue, please be warned that this is a very sensitive topic and something very real that many people experience on a daily basis. If you or someone you know is a victim of DV, then please do what you can to support them and share resources. We do not condone violence of any kind against anyone. However, when it comes to saving your own life, it is always a matter of you or them. And this person in this story decided to save themselves. I want to start this off by saying I'm not a bad person. I'm just a woman that was trying to save herself from a bad situation. I hope once I explain myself, you understand exactly where I'm coming from, and maybe, just maybe, you would have done the same thing for yourself or even someone you loved. But please, don't judge me until you have heard the entire story. This is not something that I share with everyone, but I'm at a point in my life where I have to unburden myself. Now, this isn't anything recent. This happened 20 plus years ago. But what better way to share my story than with a bunch of strangers who will never meet me and I'll never meet them. For all purposes, I just want you to know that I did what I needed to do. It was either going to be me or him. And I wasn't at a point where I was ready to go. So the only choice was him. "20 years ago, I killed my husband. Not in the manner that you might think, not in a manner that you might see on TV or in a movie or something. There was no violence, there was no fighting, no screaming. Not that day anyway. I was all out of tears. My voice was hoarse and scratchy. And I was tired. Fed up. Disgusted and terrified of the person he'd become. But I've learned throughout the years that that is what they do. They show you something and they bait you in. When in reality, they are someone and something else altogether. I guess I should start from the beginning at this point before I get into all of the details of what I endured. Don't worry though, I'll spare you the worst of it. I don't want to frighten you or even worse, disgust you to a point where you don't even get to hear the end of my story. And if I'm telling it, it's to serve a purpose. It's to help someone. It's to give someone else some strength. It's to let someone else know that they don't have to endure the same way I did for so many years. I think it all started. No. I know it all started with watching my father abuse my mother and her staying time after time after time, watching her with a busted lip and a black eye, too afraid to even speak. I guess I thought it was a normal thing. That is the way a person expressed their love, right? I remember my mama telling me that. As a matter of fact, I was about 12 years old. She'd sat me down after a bad fight with my father. I remember he knocked her head into the wall. And I sat next to her with a cool towel and wipe her face. And she said to me, through that busted lip and that black eye, a knot on her head, she told me, it ain't love if they don't beat you. And somewhere that thought settled into my subconscious and remained there until 10 years later when I met my future husband, the man that would not only change my life, but scar it forever. We were in college. And he at first presented as a very loving and caring person. All the girls loved him. Everybody thought he was such a wonderful person. He was in the fraternity. He wore the suits. He played the part to perfection. And he never deviated from it, not one single bit, the whole time we were in college dating. And I thought to myself, you have got a real good guy on your hands. How foolish I was. How foolish I was to not see. But you know who saw? My grandmother. My elderly grandmother saw right through his suit and tie. And she told me on several occasions that I shouldn't be with him, and that if he ever proposed, I should turn him down and turn my back on him forever. I just chalked it up to her being my grandmother and feeling like no one would ever be good enough for me, especially since she knew what my mother went through with my father. But it was more to it than that. My grandmother, I'm going to interject here and let you know that my grandmother was a special woman. And I'm not just saying that because she was my grandmother. I'm saying that because she was a special woman. And when I say special, I mean in the spiritual sense. She had a sense, a knowing, a wisdom about her that always made me wonder how she knew the things that she knew. How did she know certain things about people when they never gave any indication? But she always knew. She always knew. And I remember her telling me the first time my mother brought my father around, her blood ran cold. And she could hear the voices in her head screaming. She said at the time she didn't realize that those would be the screams of her daughter. My father eventually took my mother out of this world right along with himself. And that sound, that image of my mother dying will be forever burned into my memory. My grandmother told me that those same screams that she heard in her head that day that she first laid eyes on my father, those screams in her head were the very screams of the very last screams of my mother before she passed. I know you're wondering, just in this short time that I've been telling you this story, I know you're wondering why would I even go and repeat my mother's life, and I can only tell you that I don't know why. I have no logical explanation other than the words of my mother that echo in my head. They don't really love you if they don't beat you. After college, we got married. And the first thing my husband did was moved me 1,000 miles away from everyone who loved me. My grandmother, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, my friends. Moved me away from every bit of comfort I had ever had in my life. But I didn't think anything of it because he loved me, right? My grandmother, while she was getting older and even more fragile, was still strong in the mind. My grandmother was a very gifted woman in many ways. And I didn't realize just what that gift meant or how much it would mean to me and how significant it would be when it came to saving my life. Let me get back on track though. So my husband moved us 1,000 miles away, and I thought it was a new, fresh start. He took a job and told me he wanted me to stay home, take care of our household and children eventually when they started coming along. I resisted at first, and we had very small arguments about it, nothing major, but eventually we always talked it out, and he convinced me, always convinced me to see his point of view. But after the first 6 months, I was bored. I was ready to do something with my life. I was ready to leave the house and engage with others and do the same things that he was doing in his job every single day. All the things that I had gone to school to learn how to do. He wanted me to stay home and tend to his house. He wanted me to stay home and tend to his children when they came along. And none of this I found strange in the beginning. So please, again, don't judge me. Don't judge me. Because isn't that what we get married for? To take care of our homes and our husbands and our kids and to be the perfect wife? Isn't that what they tell us to do? Isn't that what they tell us to be? And all we do is take it. We give up the very best parts of ourselves, dedicate our lives to husbands that disregard us and some that even abuse us. And I'm telling y'all, that first fight, that first argument, I didn't know what was gonna happen. I didn't see it coming. There was no indication. I just wanted to talk about getting a part-time job to get out of the house. And he told me no, that I needed to be home preparing his meals so that when he got in from a long day at work, he would have something to eat. I told him I wasn't interested in learning how to cook. I wanted to work. We were sitting on the sofa, and he got incredibly quiet. And then all of a sudden he stands up and he hovers over me and he puts a hand on my shoulder and he squeezes it tightly. And he says, "You are going to do what you are told, or else." And I made the mistake of saying, "Or else what?" And he raised his closed fist and punched me in my face. And he sat back down and grabbed his newspaper and commenced to reading as if nothing happened. I ran to the bathroom crying, nose bloody, a bruise forming. And I looked at myself in the mirror, and for a brief second, the image of my mother appeared in that mirror, reflected back at me. And I broke down into tears, becoming a crumpled heap on the floor. And I heard the voice of my grandmother, who was 1,000 miles away, speaking as though she were in that bathroom with me, telling me there's only one way out. I had to look around because it sounded like she was right there with me. But foolish me just chalked it up to an incident. He's been stressed at work, had a lot going on, etc., etc. All of the excuses that we tend to give just so we could justify the abuse. It continued for years. Me getting more and more distant from my family, not just in the physical sense. They would call and I wouldn't answer. And if they called while he was home, he would give them an excuse. And if he did let me talk to them, it was always with him listening on the other end, just to make sure I didn't say anything wrong. One day my cousin called to let me know that my grandmother wasn't doing so well and that I needed to come and see her. When we got off the phone, my husband looked at me and said no. I was devastated. My grandmother was my rock after my mother passed away. My grandmother was the only reason that I'd made it in the world. And he was tearing her away from me, something worse than death would ever be able to do. That night, she began coming to me in my dreams, and always with the same message. Always with the same, you have to save yourself. It's either you or it's him. Every single night. And I would wake up in a cold sweat, trembling, scared. But I never left. And then one day I got the call that she had passed away peacefully in her sleep. I felt as though I betrayed her because I didn't go to see her before she died. But in some strange way, her death began to give me life because she started visiting me even more in my dreams. She started talking to me through other people. She started giving me signs. These were the only things that kept me alive through my husband's abuse, through his violence, through his anger, through his rage. And one day, and I'm almost ashamed to admit this, but one day, he had beaten me so badly, so terribly. I spent 2 nights sleeping on the living room floor, curled up with a pillow and a blanket from the sofa. I had to crawl to the bathroom and I had to crawl to the kitchen to get water. And all he did was look at me and laugh and told me I got what I deserved. On that second night of being on that floor, clutching that thin little blanket around me, my head resting uncomfortably on the sofa pillow. I was staring into the space beyond the coffee table. I saw my grandmother's feet, bare, covered in mud. And I blinked a few times because I thought maybe the beating I took caused some type of concussion and I was hallucinating or something. I reached my hand out to touch her feet and she was real, warm. And she said to me, "I've been dancing in the cemetery with the spirits. I've been asking them for favor for you. I've been asking them what can be done to save your life so that your mother's fate does not become your own. Asking favor from spirits is not easy. But because I am on this side with them, they have given me instructions for you. And these instructions I need you to follow, or else it will be you dancing in the cemetery with the spirits right along with me. I told you before, my grandmother was a very gifted woman. I'd always been told growing up that she was a witch, but I never believed it. People say things, but this, watching her feet covered in cemetery dirt under my coffee table while I laid on the floor, barely able to pick my head up off the pillow, not even able to speak. I was looking at her, listening to her voice just as clear, feeling her presence, her warmth. And that's when I knew she was indeed a powerful woman, both in life and in death. These were the instructions that she gave me. And I'm sharing only because it's time. Because just because. And I know it's going to sound so outrageous to many of you that a paranormal experience, a supernatural experience, a spirit came to me. Spirit of my grandmother came to me and told me that there was only one way to escape this situation alive. And it had to come down to him or me. And I need you to understand, in that moment, crumpled up on that living room floor, barely able to feel my face because he had beaten me so badly. I need you to understand, in that moment, I was not ready to go. But the anger and the hatred I had within me that built up slowly throughout the years of being with this man, they fueled the fire of me wanting to save my own life. I'm sitting here telling you this, and I'm closing my eyes, and I can still hear my grandmother's voice telling me to be as quiet as possible. Do everything he said. Whatever he wanted, acquiesce to any request that he has. Heal. Get better, find your strength, and when you are done, When you are feeling better, take a trip to the grocery store, but instead, take a detour to the cemetery. Make sure you bring a nice clean jar with you to collect some cemetery dirt. Bring it home with you. And because I don't want anyone to repeat what I did, I'm going to keep the next steps to myself. But just know that my grandmother's spirit standing there before me with cemetery dirt on her feet after dancing with the spirits all night long, she instructed me on a poisonous concoction to create and mix with the cemetery dirt. Let it sit for 3 days. And after those 3 days, you make your husband his favorite meal. And then bake a cake. Mix that jar of cemetery dirt and other ingredients into the batter, and you bake it and make it the best and prettiest cake you've ever made. You watch him eat his favorite meal, and then you serve him up that delicious cake all for himself. And you watch him eat and make sure he eats 2 slices. And when he does, when he is finished, you clean up just like any other regular evening. You go about your business, go about your duty as though nothing is different. And he will head to bed. But he won't be waking up. And when you do that, he will be on this side with me. And the spirits and I will punish him accordingly. I don't have to tell y'all that I did everything that she said. And after he ate those 2 slices of cake, he went to bed, and I cleaned up. I sat on the sofa reading a book. Eventually, I dozed off. When I woke up the next morning, I went to check on him in bed, and he was stiff as a board. And he died with a look of fear on his face, mouth open, eyes bulging wide. And I can't help but to think that my grandmother had kept her word and was there to drag him to the hell he belonged in. I made all the necessary phone calls, made all the necessary arrangements, and played the grieving wife. I even cried at his funeral. I'm not saying you should do what I did, but I'm just letting you know that I did what I had to do in order to survive, in order to live, in order to thrive. And my life changed immensely after he was gone. But just remember, it always comes down to this. It's either you or it's them. And you should always make a point to choose yourself by any means necessary.